because we're now at a stage in the credit cycle where we're seeing possibly the expiry of the moratoriums for the peak of the restructuring period, perhaps 2 or 3 years back. So we're now at a point where we'll really see how bad bank books look. And on that note, perhaps Deep could talk a little bit about the difference between the gap in the credit assessment quality at banks, the different how information flow to banks and the problems in assessing credit risk from a rating perspective.
Sure. So obviously, when we hear the discussion in various media or fora, almost inevitably there's a representation that NPAs have gone up because of economic slowdown, and then there was a policy paralysis, and global GDP has tanked. Clearly, these are correct statements, but do they reflect the entire reason of why current systemic NPA is well over 4%? Possibly no. Let's take a step back. When there were two surges of credit growth, by the way. One was 2007, 2008, then 2009 was again a significant blip. Then again there was a drastic increase in debt levels between FY 2010, FY 11. Now prior to 2008, when someone was underwriting a loan, obviously it was a human being who was underwriting, he or she would get bombarded from all bona fide sources, be it Prime Minister's Advisory Council, Planning Commission, sundry reports, which almost assume that we will be growing for 8% till till Judgment Day. So that was built into their assumptions. No one was expecting a 6, 4.5. When it fell to 6, there was a slurry of report that this was the bottom. When it came to 5, then there was again a flurry of reports that this was the bottom. When it came to 4.5, and I hope this time it's correct, it looks like it has hit a bottom. But what happens is when you're giving a 5, 7, 10-year loan and your base case assumption is even conservatively, if you shave off instead of 8% or 7% growth, and not that they directly translate into revenue, but a reasonable haircut also, and it falls significantly below, the cumulative effect is huge. The cumulative effect is huge. To that extent, when such loans actually go for CDR, you expect them to turn around, and the CDR criteria is sort of more lenient. They expect some DSCR to be above 1.25, which are quite benign, and that gives us scope to turn around. But if we grow, say for instance from today, right from today to next 5 years, even at what sounds like today a really healthy rate of growth, say a 6%, none of the market enthusiasts suggest that there's a 6% growth this year also, but say we grow at 6% year on year for 5 years, which is actually a very big deal. Then also when you have underwritten a loan with a much higher cash flows, it's unlikely those expectations are met. So as far as CDR is concerned, the short answer is we would expect a significant amount of slippage to happen further and this significant is under the assumption that during next 5 to 6 years there will be benign global interest rates. Even if interest rates are increased, there would be no spillover effect and other things, and under these circumstances we would have significant slippages in CDR. If any of these assumptions become less benign, then it would be a huge number of CDRs have to be re-underwritten all over again.
Mr. Seshadri, interesting point for you to come in and explain how banks are dealing with a situation like this from a risk perspective.
Yeah.
Given the lapses in the recent past over the last maybe 3 to 5 years.
See, the reason for NPA, as mostly explained earlier, could be mainly due to this. But if you analyze the accounts becoming bad, 20% of the accounts have only become bad because of the economic or other reasons. There have been about more than 60%, I will say about 80% is because someone has been growing too fast, someone has been diversifying in unrelated area because somebody else made some higher profit, they also went into the diversification unrelated, or probably they went into real estate, whatever be the thing, they found more profitable. When more profitability is there, there is always a higher risk is there, higher risk and higher profitability. Therefore, this is one of the key areas. And second thing, of course, is the overall economic. When the overall economic hits, it hits both the guys who have taken a conscious decision and also a conscious diversification plan, unrelated diversification plan. That is why the amount is looking bigger, an average of about 10%, including the restructured accounts, looks like a reality now.
Mr. Seshadri, diversification across Asia is very often used as a shorthand for leakage and is associated with weak corporate governance. To what degree is that risk, is that understanding incorporated in the way banks assess risk, and to what degree is that changing going forward? Are banks becoming much tougher with companies who are looking to go outside their core fields? And to what degree are banks tightening sources of leakage?
Can I repeat? Sorry.
To what degree are banks tightening sources of leakage and cracking down on bad corporate governance? Because very often in the cases of diversification, across Asia, the experience has been that this is very often shorthand for taking money out of the company, quite frankly.
Correct, correct. See, the basic I will say is when a company gets funds, and when we change from the regulatory lending, we look at the till 1980s or 1990s, where MPBF or whatever you can say, the lending to the corporate sector was more or less driven by RBI directives. Suddenly, when there was, it was the banks are open to the cool air from the regulated regime, and earlier they did not have the liquidity and they are flush with the liquidity. Therefore, they have to reach a certain target. For example, AAA customer. If it's a AAA customer and 10 AAA customer and 100 banks following on him. Therefore, in the over enthusiasm probably to meet the target or show up my bottom line, top line, whatever is there. Therefore, all the 100 pounced on the same 10 people. Therefore, the AAA customer or even AA customer got more than what he needed. In that case, whatever excess it is parked off in whatever may not be non-essential. It was parked in non-essential. Therefore, that is our reading. And to set right this, what we have to do, if I may, this one is that probably that is why so many companies are doing, even with their in CDR, outside CDR, is that non-core assets, selling of non-core assets, then coming back to basics. Now, grow only where in my strength. These are the two areas they have to go forward. And banks, off the record, I can tell you, because I have to keep my overall figure acceptable to the public, probably the banks may try to restructure within an acceptable guidelines.
Which brings us to another interesting point. We're probably at the other end of the cycle. Maybe 10 years ago, banks were trying to give money to corporates and they were under pressure to do so. Now we're probably at a point where banks are lending money to corporates to essentially evergreen. And both Deep and Mr. Seshadri, how prevalent is this practice? How much of the incremental credit at this point is possibly evergreening, and to what degree does that mask the extent of NPAs? To what degree of the incremental credit being put out to corporates at this stage is essentially evergreening?
Incremental growth?
Is essentially evergreening, lending more money to bad corporates just to service debt.
If you, the question is that what percentage of asset is evergreening or something. The point I would like to say is, if you want a ballpark figure of the record, I can tell you it should be about 3 to 4% could be that. Because in my view, whatever is happening, that is why if you see the RBI circular of February 24, they said that it is not that I was surprised that when RBI had to come out to the circular to say that you guys manage your portfolio banks, SMA 0, SMA 1, SMA 2 and all these things. They said that because if during those period when the account becomes bad, it was easy for somebody to pass on to somebody else because it was not in the public domain. Now it is in the public domain. When there is a overdue of more than 30 days, it is coming and it has to be more than 60 days, it has to be reported in SMA 2. Therefore, the palming of the assets, I would call, is not likely to happen so soon. Therefore, they have to manage within the bank themselves. The portfolio wise, I will say that it will be around 3 to 4%.
Interesting you mentioned the new regime, the SMA2 regime in the JLF forum, because to what degree is that, do you see that successfully recognize NPAs earlier with any degree of success?
There is clearly, I think at ground level, whereas the overarching framework looks very reassuring at ground level, there are, at the nuts and bolts level, there may be a lot of slippages. Say for instance, the guideline to a rating agency is very, very clearly and unambiguously, the first instance you get to know of a default from a credible source, which is usually whoever is invested in that loan, or you have to tag it as D. Now, majority of my loans that any rating agency rates are bank loans. So unless the bank informs me specifically, because they have my address, they use my rating letter, they know whom to contact, unless they tell me that a default has occurred, there is no way I will ever be knowing that there is a default. Because rest assured, the issuers would not come and say that I have defaulted, please put a D tag. So I have to wait all the while that possibly the auditor would do his or her job, and when the annual reports comes, they would say unambiguously there is a delay or default. No, but that is unlikely to happen, because what usually happens is they will say the company is generally not in default, or something which can mean the whole world. You are